Metro Atlanta absorbs about 100,000 people a year. Many of those people have real money to buy houses. But Atlanta's running out of cheap land to build on. More and more, that means buying houses in less affluent neighborhoods for whatever the market will bear. Home prices rose 25% in Atlanta this year. Gentrification. That means neighborhoods changing from poor and working class to middle income and rich. In the city of Atlanta, that also typically means changing from black to white. And it means pushing out people without money. Atlanta's new mayor, Andre Dickens, has made a defense against gentrification a core political goal. We're gonna talk about what that means, why it might be hard, and what's at stake on the next Atlanta. I'm George Chidi. We're at the King Center. This is the next Atlanta. I'm here with King Williams, a journalist, a filmmaker, local black man.
Yes, that is me.
Minor league stand-up comedian.
I aspire to be one. I aspire to.
And also, you did a TEDx talk on gentrification.
Yes, I did. I'm an alma mater, Georgia State University, back in 2015.
So let's talk about gentrification in Atlanta. What's it look like?
The first thing I always tell people, this is probably the 8th era of gentrification that we've been in, so it looks different now. What it is, I would say this 8th era.
8th era?
Yeah, so gentrification has been happening in Atlanta since at least the 1970s. The area that we now call Midtown was actually the first area, and most studies have looked at gentrification. We look at what that is, has been around Piedmont Park, the area in the creation of Midtown, and those adjacent communities around it. So now we're in our 8th era, and so it looks very different because we all feel it. So this has been about 50 years in the making, and every successive era of gentrification becomes more and more problematic, and it becomes larger in scale.
People can argue that some elements of gentrification are revitalizing, like that they're not necessarily negative, but not entirely so, obviously. What are the problems?
Well, yeah, the problem is, I think, in addition, we kind of conflate gentrification with progress, and we also conflate revitalization with gentrification. And Ruth Glass, the woman who gave us the term of gentrification as she was studying it in London in the 1960s, delineates what is gentrification and what is revitalization, and I'm gonna use that as a framework. The reason being is that redevelopment and revitalization is good for a city across the board. What she does prioritize in her work is that the removing of people, the removing of resources, the removing of old businesses or businesses that anchor that community for a newer demographic is the problem. And that's the problem we've been living in Atlanta and like they were living in London 60 years ago.
So what's it look like? What are the really stark recent examples of gentrification that you sort of key on?
Well, in this era, I think one of the more interesting things about this era of gentrification is the Columbus thing. What we're going to talk about is like this idea that nothing existed before I came here, so therefore I have to name it. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, hopefully not you, but this whole West Midtown of Atlanta and the Upper West Side, these are a bunch of communities on the west side of Atlanta that now have been rebranded or grouped together as one new grouping with a lot of new businesses, a lot of new anchoring developments that are coming online with this idea that West Midtown is here when nothing else existed, right? And what people didn't exist. And in the case of West Midtown, most of that is basically Howell Mill or Knight Park, Bankhead, or even Georgia Tech. In that area was called Home Park at one time. And so all of that now is being called West Midtown. And that's not really the case. Things existed here in our lifetimes that we've seen, but now it's all under the guise of this new thing. So this Columbus thing has probably been the more egregious example of gentrification in this new era of Atlanta.
This idea that you could just sort of walk in and rename Home Park, like the people who lived in Home Park forever aren't going to say something about it. Except, right, of course, that half of them are now living in Norcross.
That is also true. So old Atlanta doesn't live in Atlanta anymore, either through a couple of reasons. Either they just died off, they moved away, or their kids didn't want to take in the property. So this is why we have so much of the backlash against the West Midtowns of the world or the Upper West Sides of the world, is because old Atlanta just doesn't live here for a bunch of different reasons. And so we can't sit up there and act like it's all out of thin air that this happened. Some of it is, but a lot of it also too is just we didn't keep our communities of those who could, and we left for different reasons.
I think about this. When I think about, like, there are two neighborhoods that I think about a lot when I'm looking at this. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, very poor, very, very, very low homeownership rates historically. And that's fundamentally different from a place like Peyton Forest, which had very high, for the African American community, very high homeownership rates. But Peyton Forest had middle-class Black residents who bought it in 1970 or something like that. They're all dying off. Like, and they're, like you say, their kids are now, do I want to live in this neighborhood or do I sell this house? And who do I sell this house to? And what are they going to do with the house? It's a different problem. It's a different kind of gentrification than what's happening in, like, Pittsburgh or Capitol View.
Yeah. One of the things I always tell people is that gentrification is not, race does intersect with gentrification, but gentrification by and large is always a class-based thing. So you can have Black people gentrifying other Black people. And then also one of the things we're noticing now on a metro level is that we're slowly starting to see what's going to happen with Latino communities start gentrifying other Latino communities, especially in, like, that Beaufort Highway to Gwinnett corridor. But in the case of what you're saying, Atlanta and our Black community right now is that we don't necessarily know what we are anymore. And what I mean by that is we were defined by the neighborhoods and the struggle that we had. Because we've had a successive wave of new people moving to Atlanta, both to the city and the metro, what it means to be Atlanta is different now. And so somebody who wants to live in Peyton Forest right now, they don't have the same connection to the community as somebody who has just moved here 2 weeks ago. And so that's what we're kind of seeing also. And I think that when it comes to gentrification, we haven't told our story well, we haven't preserved our history. So when I move into Peyton Forest, I don't see it as Peyton Forest, I just see it as an adjacent neighborhood that I can flip in a couple houses in 3 or 4 years. So we have to do better with that. We have to also be more understanding of what's happening, and we play a factor in that.
So how do we do that? Like, how do we actually get this neighborhood level identity preserved?
Right. I think there's small bits and pieces. So on one end, I like what the Grove Park area has been doing to really get their name out there. And I really do like what people in the West End have been doing, which is having events, getting a lot of local press, getting monuments erected, getting buildings, if they can be, of historic nature preserved and revitalized, like the Wren's Nest over in the West End, to let people know, hey, this is a cultural and community center. The other is, we just got to be honest, there's a lot of people who are poor. So if we can't get those people who are, like, the most disadvantaged to be working and active members in the community, either on, like, a PTA level or a local school or a local community like a HOA or a local renter organization, we're not going to have that tie-in, because these are people who are likely the workforce, and they also outnumber homeowners. In Atlanta, renters outnumber homeowners across the board, even in Buckhead. If we can't get our renters active, both on an economic level and a community level and in a preservation level, those efforts are going to be fraught. And so it's about revitalizing those people.
King Williams, you're the man. I'm grateful. You're blessed.
No, thank you for having me. This is cool.
Good stuff. I'm George Chidi. We're at the King Center. This is The Next Atlanta. And I'm with Gavin McGuire, who is the executive director of the Grove Park Foundation. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're talking about gentrification. And what I really want to start with are the things that your foundation is doing in order to keep people from being displaced and pushed out of their houses. Tell me about the work that you do.
Yeah, we work to revitalize the Grove Park community, to bring equity, to bring a thriving community, and really just empowering our residents. The Grove Park community has been like one of the shining stars of Atlanta, throughout Atlanta's history. And, we're working to continue to bring the things that the residents, our legacy residents, more importantly, need to continue to thrive.
This term, legacy residents, like we're making a distinction between the people who've been living in a community for 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years and folks who are coming in who are new. What does empowerment for a legacy resident look like? Like, what does that person need in order to stay?
Yeah, first of all, is just respect and knowing that they matter and that the assets that they built throughout their years in the community, the the blood, sweat, and tears, the social capital, all the equity that they put to make that community thrive is being respected and to let their voices be heard. Also, for legacy residents, making sure that they have a voice and a seat at the table.
Do you have a sense of how many people may have been pushed out of Grove Park over the last, say, 5-10 years?
Heard a percentage of about 25%. And, that's one of the reasons why this job and Grove Park Foundation and so many other stalwarts that's working in the community really important to this work, because we're triaging a lot of past hurts, a lot of historical damage that's been done to community. But I think it's going to be a story at the end of empowerment and of really supporting and stabilizing families and communities through a lot of the work that's being done in the community.
There's a gap in homeownership. Black people in Atlanta, homeownership rate's about 40%, 45%, something like that. White people, 80%, give or take. What do you think it's going to take to raise the homeownership rate for African Americans in your community?
I think it's going to take just a comprehensive approach. It's not going to be one panacea or one magic bullet that's going to change the problem. But I think, making sure that we work together, excited to hear with our 61st mayor and the work that the previous mayor was doing with One Atlanta, with the goal of 20,000 housing units. I think it starts with all of the players at the table, from the government agencies, nonprofits, from the developers. It's just going to be a comprehensive approach. But I also think as we build buildings, we have to also make sure that we put the same equity and the same energy into building people. So I think it's just about education, about empowerment, and giving people access to the things that they need. I think people are educated and they want to be homeowners, but having access to the capital, having access to favorable bank loans that historically haven't been part of into play for African Americans and for people of color, historically. So I think it's really a comprehensive approach. And finally, with that empowerment and that education, helping people to feel whole and to stabilize their situation so they can dream, not only home ownership, business ownership, good health, good education, and people could have those things that's promised in the American dream.
Andre Dickens was talking about this. He was talking about this fear that poorer Black residents of Atlanta, particularly the impoverished Black resident of Atlanta, is being pushed out. And he caught flack for that from folks who are advocating for a separate city of Buckhead. They described that comment as racist. Do you believe it's racist for the mayor to want to retain the racial composition of neighborhoods like Grove Park?
Yeah, I personally don't think it's racist. I think it's just a point of respect. So I'll use the other R word, respect. Respecting people's contribution to a neighborhood, respecting people's, right to have adequate housing, respecting people's right to have, good paying jobs and to not having to be displaced from where your culture and where your history has been. Home and neighborhoods are important to everyone's fabric. That's why we have homecomings and we have, family reunions and people coming back to a base, and your neighborhood and your home is always that base. And when you look at, your life trajectory, a lot of people say homeownership is the first path to stabilization and also the next step to generational wealth. And so just something as simple as staying in your home or having the opportunity to be in your home is a building block for the other things that can help, generations to come in your family. So I think, also with that displacement, that uproots a lot of people's lives, and it just starts them from ground zero, always moving and not having that solid base.
Gavin, thank you. You've been a marvelous guest. I'm grateful. I'm glad you were here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and look forward to continuing to work in the Grove Park community and to serve and getting the chance to know you and work with you in the future.
I'm George Chidi, and we're at the King Center. This is the Next Atlanta. And I'm here with Stan Sugarman. Stan is an affordable housing developer. Is that fair to say?
I do more than affordable housing, but that's my passion.
Tell us about yourself first. What do you do?
We're real estate investors and developers of interesting projects in the city of Atlanta with a particular focus on affordable housing and adaptive reuse.
You also used to run the Kirkwood's neighborhood planning unit, right?
Yeah, I was the president of KNO and an officer in the MPU.
Like, we're here talking about gentrification, and Kirkwood has gone through a huge cycle of gentrification. What does that look like from your perspective?
It's been good and bad. We've seen tremendous infrastructure improvements, a lot of investment in the housing stock, expansion of the number of units, but at the same time, we've actually lost population over the last 30 years as the demographics have changed and the economic patterns have changed. I mean, I believe the richest neighborhood now on the east side of the city of Atlanta.
That's interesting that they've lost population.
As you get richer, the family sizes have gotten smaller.
So that's kind of how displacement works.
Yes.
What are the things that are really causing displacement? What are the factors that will tell somebody this is how much displacement you're going to get? What does it look like?
So you have the economic pressures on those households. Property taxes go up. The code enforcement issues. Some harassment. And then as the neighborhood changes, they're losing their support system, right? So we're losing the previous demographic, which was African-American. And so Kirkwood, that was, when I moved there, probably 75, 80% African-American. Kirkwood's lucky to be at 50% right now.
Yeah.
And we've lost something as a city. We've lost an institutional memory, we've lost diversity, and we've lost, that fabric that attracting everybody to Atlanta, that hopefully we keep attracting people to Atlanta, but we've lost something.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you is because you're where the rubber meets the road. Like, if you want to build affordable housing, you need somebody who knows how to do it. Why is it as difficult as it is to build affordable housing in Atlanta?
I mean, cost is a huge factor. When we first started in the business 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, unit of affordable housing, we could produce on the west side around $50,000 a unit. That same property is probably $400,000. We're doing a for sale right now, and it's the cost is $400,000, and we're going to sell it for $250,000. So somebody has to lose $150,000 to make that project work now.
Wow.
Whereas before, we lost money, but it was $5,000 or $10,000 that we were getting federal subsidies on.
These federal subsidies, it sounds like the subsidies aren't keeping up with what it takes in order to get affordable housing built.
Well, that subsidy program is actually Bush. It was Bush money, and we just running out. It took so long to implement that we were part of the rising tide. We were selling units, $75,000, $80,000. And it was hard to find mortgage companies to make the deal. It was hard because the numbers were so small. Now the reverse is true of, we bring a unit to market and there's a lottery and there's all this pressure to take the unit and to produce it. It's become incredibly difficult. And that subsidy money's gone. We're paying it into the US Treasury now. The program's dead. We need a fresh source of money, and we're not going to get it. The Neighborhood Stabilization Program was what it was called. And that was money the feds threw as a one-time impetus into the infrastructure, and it's gone. We burned through all the money, or we have to pay it back.
I'm thinking about how much money it would take. Because look, pandemic relief, there's a lot of money sloshing around right now. And frankly, some of that I think needs to go to affordable housing. But how much money is necessary in Atlanta in order to get to a number of units that stem gentrification, where people aren't being forced out of their neighborhoods?
You're talking billions of dollars, maybe 10 billion, because we're, the number I hear about in the region is 50,000 units. And you talk about an affordable unit, if you're doing multifamily, they're hitting $300,000 a unit right now. So
it costs $300,000 a unit to build a multifamily.
The last project I saw, which was a low-income tax credit project that the Invest Atlanta put money into, it hit $300,000.
$300,000 isn't affordable. Like, I'm just gonna say it. Like, if you're earning $20 an hour, you'd have trouble making a mortgage payment or a rental payment on a $300,000 unit.
And that's where the subsidies come in, because it buys it down to an attainable rent, right? That subsidy goes into the project and sets the rent at 30% of your income. And we're not producing enough to even offset our natural decline as we burn off affordability. You know, the hole's getting deeper right now, unfortunately.
So what neighborhoods would you say are going to be targets for this? Like the neighborhoods where the property values remain low enough where somebody's going to come in, snap it up, and then the affordable housing that exists starts to go away.
I think it's already done. I don't think we have a neighborhood left that's not a problem. I maybe Cleveland Avenue and really South Atlanta around the airport. But I think when you talk about city of Atlanta, the waves hit and we're seeing the cost of it.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm incredibly grateful for your time here. This is what we needed to understand. Stan, thanks.
Thanks.
I'm George Chidi. We're at the King Center, and this is the Next Atlanta. I'm with Segura Jones, who's a community member in Capitol View, which is a neighborhood sort of south side Atlanta that's going through gentrification right now. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say? What does gentrification look like in Capitol View?
Yes. So thank you for having me here. And first, let's clarify that Capitol View is definitely in the south side of Atlanta, even though we're in that kind of nebulous zone where we're not southwest enough or deep enough in the southwest. We are south of I-20, and we have all the pains that are associated with that. And so when we talk about gentrification, there is this wide spectrum or long spectrum of what that means. Does it mean community reinvestment, or does it mean predatory lending and displacement of low income and Black people? So gentrification spans that whole range.
What do you do in order to keep people from being displaced out of your neighborhood?
I know in our neighborhood, what we're trying to do is take people's interest in staying in their homes, staying in their communities, and give them more ownership. So even if you have a home that you've owned for a long time, or you're a new resident, how do we bring people together to have more interest in what's happening in their communities? How are we the ones that are buying the properties? Our idea is to be kind of more progressive in our thought frame of, well, if we get our money together, if we pull our resources together, then we can be the ones to purchase those properties.
Tell me what that looks like at Capitol View. You were telling me an interesting story the other day about this Masonic building on, is it Dillon Metropolitan?
Correct. So historic building, one of our neighbors, former president of the Capitol View Neighborhood Association, during our time on that board, we were really pushing for this community ownership model, and the timing was right. People understood the necessity.
So the idea was to buy a significant property in the neighborhood with neighborhood money, and then to take shares of that property and give it to people who had lived in the neighborhood for a long time, so that they would have some ownership in something in the community.
We want, whether you're a young person that's lived there your whole life and a legacy resident, or a person that's been there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and have raised 3 generations of family, we wanted them to be able to walk through the neighborhood and say, that's my building. So even though that purchase didn't happen, we are still going through this phase and concept of how do we make this happen? how do we form a company with, potentially 300 members in this LLC, and how to make that work so that people really have ownership, have pride, and can point to it and say that when they say this is my neighborhood, we really mean it.
There's this phrase, and I'm still wrestling with it, legacy residents. Are there legacy residents that your organization and that your neighborhood have been able to hold on to because of something deliberate that your community has done in order to keep them?
But we have definitely rallied as a community to raise money, to work on houses, and to make sure that people have a place to stay, whether it's issues with having fraudulent contractors come in and take a senior's money, needing help with rebuilding parts of their homes, making sure that they're able to, and because they want to, stay in the neighborhood while we're working on the home, or while they're figuring things out. And also doing things like tax abatement workshops for those that are in the community, so that they can see what resources are available to them in order to stay long term. But it's the whole process. It's not just one project of helping renovate a home or one workshop to help people with their taxes. It's a long-term value system of a neighborhood, and how we treat each other and how we respond to each other when we see a neighbor in need. One of the things that has come out of the pandemic, I think, is foundations and nonprofit organizations being more willing to fund the grassroots and community-based organizations. And so out of that, our neighborhood association applied for a grant through Partnership for Southern Equity for a development watch program. And so we now have the opportunity to educate our neighbors on things like real estate investment trusts, on how to talk to and watch developers and ask the right questions to make sure that development isn't happening to them, but happening for them. So really excited to start that process.
Segura, I'm grateful for you. This was just what we needed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Plainly, there's no easy solution to gentrification. Atlanta is facing some very powerful economic forces that are drawing people to the city who've got money to spend, and they're displacing people who don't have that kind of cash. It's going to take a serious intervention, and it's going to take political will that, frankly, might not yet exist, because not enough people have been gentrified quite yet. We've given you a lot to think about and some resources to use. I invite you to watch this episode again and each of the previous thought-provoking episodes of The Next Atlanta. Just log on to fox5atlanta.com, go to the shows section at the bottom of the page, and click on The Next Atlanta. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon for the next episode of The Next Atlanta.